Alternate ending. The most important thing to understand about this sequel is that it quietly erases the ending most people actually saw in theaters. Back in February of 2023, the project was confirmed to disregard the theatrical finale entirely and instead follow the film's alternate ending, the version that only ever surfaced on the home release. If you only remember the theatrical cut, here's what you watched. Neville pulls the pin on a grenade and dies a martyr, while Anna and Ethan slip out the back with a vial of his cure. The alternate ending is a completely different scene. The Darkseeker Alpha presses up against the glass partition and draws a butterfly on it, and in that moment, Neville realizes the creatures are sentient. He hands back the captured female he'd been experimenting on, and the Darkseekers simply leave. Neville then takes the cure himself and drives to Bethel, Vermont, with Anna and Ethan, a changed man, alive. That single canon switch is the entire reason Will Smith can come back as Robert Neville at all, because theatrical Neville is dead and buried under a grenade blast. Director Francis Lawrence has admitted publicly that he stayed conflicted about both endings for years, and writer Akiva Goldsman specifically pitched building the sequel off the alternate version so that Neville survives. Most casual viewers don't even know this ending exists, which is exactly why it has to come first. Once you accept that the butterfly scene is now canon, every single theory that follows suddenly makes sense. Neville is alive. Every theory about this sequel runs into the same wall first, the fact that the hero blew himself up. The prevailing reading is the simplest one, and it only works because the alternate ending is now canon. Robert Neville survived, and the sequel just picks him up decades down the road. Goldsman has said the film starts, in his words, a few decades later than the first, echoing the time jump structure of The Last of Us. That puts an aged Neville in a world that has had 20 to 30 years to reshape itself without him standing guard as its lone defender. The theory holds that he made it to Vermont, found or founded some kind of survivor presence, and has been carrying the weight of his old lab experiments the entire time. What we know for certain is that Will Smith is confirmed to return as Dr. Robert Neville. Whether he's the active lead of the sequel or more of a legacy figure handing off to a younger generation is fan inference rather than anything the production has confirmed. The strength of this theory is exactly that it requires no contortions at all. The alternate ending already did the heavy lifting. It kept Neville breathing, so the sequel doesn't have to invent a resurrection or a clone or a dream. It just has to age him up. The time jump. Goldsman didn't hide where the idea came from. He said outright that he was obsessed with one specific show. He has stated the project was directly influenced by The Last of Us, and specifically by its structure of dropping you into the world long after the collapse. He described wanting to show a world that's post-apocalypse, but also after a 20 to 30 year lapse, a place that has had time to scar over. The theory that grows out of that is straightforward. The sequel skips the immediate fall of civilization entirely and opens on a world that's part rebuilt, part still feral. A jump that long does something crucial. It lets the Darkseekers actually evolve on screen instead of staying frozen as the snarling monsters from the first film. It also opens the door to a whole younger generation, people who were born into the ruins and never knew the old world at all. Fans treat this time jump as the single most important structural clue we have, because almost every other theory depends on it. Without a multi-decade gap, the Darkseekers stay static and the story stays small. With it, everything becomes possible. Connecticut Settlement. The biggest casting question finally got a real answer, and that answer killed the most popular guess at the same time. Will Smith confirmed that Michael B. Jordan's character is the head of a settlement in Connecticut. More importantly, Smith explicitly said Jordan is not my son, which shut down the long-running theory that Jordan was playing a grown-up Ethan. Here's why the location matters. In the alternate ending, Neville heads for Bethel, Vermont in search of a survivors' colony, and Connecticut sits just to the south of there, which is a pretty strong hint about how the two leads eventually cross paths. The geography theory holds that Neville's group and Jordan's settlement are on a collision course, whether that turns out to be cooperative or hostile. We also know Goldsman has written 2 full drafts of the script, with feedback coming directly from both Smith and Jordan, so these aren't loose ideas, they're baked into pages. Whether the two settlements end up allied or at war is still unconfirmed, but the pieces are clearly being arranged for a meeting. By the way, If you're enjoying this so far, I make videos like this all the time, and a subscribe would genuinely help the channel out. Thanks. Darkseekers Speak. The scariest theory isn't that the monsters come back, it's that this time they can talk to you. A widely shared theory argues that the Darkseekers in the sequel regain the ability to speak, restoring a detail straight out of Richard Matheson's original novel that the first film threw away. In Matheson's book, the infected keep their language, and some of them even taunt the protagonist by name through the walls of his house. The 2007 film stripped all of that out and reduced them to feral, roaring creatures with no dialogue and no apparent inner life. A decades-long time jump gives the perfect evolutionary cover for speech to re-emerge, since the population has had a generation or two to stabilize and adapt. The theory goes that the moment a Darkseeker can form a sentence, the whole genre shifts. They stop being a threat to survive and become a party you have to negotiate with. Fans cite this one constantly, precisely because it bridges the movie back to the book it was supposedly based on. None of this is confirmed by the production. It lives in analysis pieces and fan discussion, but it's the kind of change that would announce a completely different kind of sequel. The Alpha Pair. One overlooked detail in the alternate ending hints that the Darkseekers love the way we do. Watch that scene again, and the Alpha male's entire assault on Neville's home stops looking like an attack. It's a rescue mission for one specific captured female. The clincher is what Neville notices: a butterfly tattoo on the female's arm that matches the butterfly the Alpha drew on the glass, and he realizes the two of them are mates. The theory is that the sequel brings this pair back, or builds the story around their offspring, making them actual characters instead of background creatures. That would hand the Darkseekers a family unit, the exact emotional core the original film denied them. Their return in the sequel hasn't been confirmed, but as a thread to pull, it recasts the monsters as grieving partners, and it sets up every empathy theory that comes after it. Neville the Monster. Here's the theory that flips the entire franchise on its head. What if Robert Neville was the villain the whole time? This reading argues the sequel will tell at least part of the story from the Darkseekers' point of view, the perspective in which Neville is the boogeyman who stalks the night, abducting and dissecting their kind on a steel table. And this isn't invented out of nowhere. It's lifted directly from Matheson's novel, where the protagonist is ultimately executed as a monster of legend by the new society he never understood. The alternate ending already plants that exact seed. Neville is genuinely shocked to learn that the infected are terrified of him. Reframe their nightly attacks through that lens, and they were never mindless hunger. They were a people trying to stop a serial experimenter from taking any more of their own. The theory holds that the sequel forces Neville, and the audience right alongside him, to sit with decades of accumulated guilt for what he did in that lab. This is the moral inversion the title always implied, but the first film buried under explosions, and it's the single change most likely to make the sequel feel like a fundamentally different movie than the one people remember. Darkseekers Evolved. Give a predator 20 years and it stops being the same animal, and that's exactly the bet this theory makes. The central evolution theory holds that the long gap lets the Darkseekers advance into something more human-looking and more intelligent than the creatures we last saw. Fans point to a whole menu of possible adaptations: sophisticated cognition, tool use, real social structure, and most importantly, a reduced sensitivity to sunlight, which was their single defining weakness. A sun-tolerant Darkseeker would erase the original film's core survival rule, the simple safety of daylight, and that alone would terrify anyone who remembers the first movie. There's even evidence baked into the original. The so-called moving mannequin theory points to a scene where a department store mannequin Neville had named Fred appears to have been physically relocated by the Darkseekers, which implies planning and intelligence long before any sequel. The first film's final act leader already showed real cunning too, organizing a coordinated siege to reclaim his mate rather than just charging in on instinct. An evolved population also makes Michael B. Jordan's settlement leader far more interesting, because he could be governing right alongside, or in open conflict with, a near-human Darkseeker society. And the math has always favored them. The Crippen virus carried roughly a 90% kill rate, wiping out about 5.4 billion people, leaving somewhere near 588 million Darkseekers worldwide, against only about 12 million immune humans. That's a wildly lopsided population the first film never addressed, and a decades later sequel finally can. On-screen evolution into near-human beings isn't confirmed, but as the connective tissue of every other theory, it's the one fans debate the hardest. Darkseeker Prisoner. There's a darker version of Neville survives, and it's genuinely grim. This theory holds that Neville doesn't escape into a free new life at all. Instead, he ends up a prisoner of the Darkseekers. It fits the meaning of the title almost too perfectly. Neville held captive by the very society that fears him as their legend. It would also give the filmmakers a clean way to show the Darkseeker world from the inside, seen entirely through the eyes of a captive. Most chillingly, it reframes the phrase "I am legend" as a prison cell, rather than a heroic epitaph. It's entirely a fan theory, with nothing from the production to back it, but as a quick, unsettling alternative to the comfortable free Survivor reading, it keeps you off balance. The cure question. The first film ended on a cure, so the obvious question is whether that cure ever actually worked. Remember, in the theatrical ending, the cure reaches a Vermont survivor colony in Anna's hands, but the alternate ending canon, the one the sequel is following, never delivers it that way. The theory is that the sequel reveals the cure failed outright, was never distributed widely, or only ever worked in part. A failed or contested cure is almost necessary, because it keeps the Darkseekers in play decades later, instead of simply curing them out of existence and ending the franchise. It also hands Neville's lab guilt a real payoff, the gut punch that all those experiments may have produced nothing usable at all. It's a fan theory, but it's the one that quietly answers the most obvious continuity question. You can't have a Darkseeker movie if everybody already got cured. Two settlements. Put a human colony and an evolved Darkseeker society on the same map, and you have built either a war or a treaty. With Jordan confirmed as the head of a Connecticut settlement and Neville's people up in Vermont, this theory predicts the sequel's real conflict is political, not monster versus man. It imagines competing human factions, the hardliners who want extermination on one side, and the people who recognize that the Darkseekers are sentient on the other. That mirrors the exact factional structure of The Last of Us, the show Goldsman openly cited as his inspiration. Jordan's settlement could end up being the film's moral fault line, the place that decides whether to weaponize the Darkseekers or sit down and negotiate with them. And the theory positions Neville, a man who already learned firsthand that the Darkseekers are people, as either the bridge between the two worlds or the lone dissenter shouting into the wind. This is the theory that turns the sequel into a society rebuilding drama, and it's the most concrete picture anyone has of what a decades-later story actually does with its characters once the jump scares wear off. Faithful to Matheson. The wildest theory of all is that this sequel finally adapts the book the first movie flatly refused to. Both Goldsman and Lawrence have signaled that the sequel leans hard toward Matheson's source novel and its themes. Matheson's core idea was that humanity's reign as the dominant species had come to an end, that a new infected society would simply inherit the world, and the first film abandoned that completely. This theory holds the sequel restores the novel's actual premise, that the Darkseekers aren't a plague to be cured, but the next civilization, which would make the human settlements the dwindling holdouts, rather than the rightful heirs. How faithfully this sequel actually commits to that is unconfirmed, but it carries the biggest thematic stakes of any theory here. A story about extinction and inheritance instead of survival. I Am Legend. Almost nobody who saw the movie knows what the title actually means, and this sequel is finally positioned to explain it. In Matheson's novel, the title lands as a final-page gut punch. Neville, the last human, realizes he has become the monster of legend to the new infected society, the very thing that now fears and executes him. The book's Neville is captured, sentenced to death, and his dying thought is, "I am legend," as he understands that he is now the boogeyman, exactly the way vampires once were to humans. In the novel, the infected develop a pill that controls their bloodlust. They stabilize, they rebuild a functioning society, and they hunt down the truly feral undead. All of it the civilization building the film simply ignored. There's even a character named Ruth who turns out to be one of the infected, sent to spy on Neville after he killed her husband. And her reveal makes it clear he has been murdering members of a working society this whole time. Neither film ending ever explained any of this. The theatrical cut made Neville a savior, the alternate cut made him a repentant man, but neither one ever made him the legend. So the capstone theory is the one everything else has been building toward, that the sequel finally delivers the title's true meaning. Neville recast as the mythic monster of a new world. The Darkseeker Prisoner theory. The Neville the Monster theory. All of them converge right here, on the ending the title has been quietly pointing at for decades. It's a spoiler that's been hiding in plain sight on the poster this entire time, and the sequel is the first thing in the franchise actually built to pay it off. If this was worth your time, consider subscribing so you don't miss anything we put out next. Thanks for watching.